and my name is April Dawson-Rawlings, and I am the Executive Director of the California Commission on Disability Access, and I will pass it to my colleague to introduce herself.
Good morning. My name is Jan Garrett, and I am the Deputy Director of ADA Programs for the Pacific ADA Center.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jan. And now I am going to pass it back to CCDA staff to go over our Zoom accessibility features for today's webinar on emergency preparedness, integrating access into business resiliency and adaptation plan.
Thank you, Executive Director Dawson-Rawlings. Good afternoon. My name is Abigail Ridge, she, her pronouns, and I am the Operations Manager with the California Commission on Disability Access. I'm a Caucasian woman with dark brown hair and glasses, and I'm wearing a dark gray sweater. During this time, I am going to be reviewing the various accessibility features that are available via Zoom for today's event. A general housekeeping and accessibility overview. Please keep your audio muted during the webinar. Please use the Q&A feature to post questions. I will go over the Q&A feature more in depth shortly. Please note that the chat feature is distracting for people with vision disabilities who use screen reading software. To change Zoom's viewing options, on the upper right-hand corner, select View for Speaker or Gallery View, and with Screen Share, there are either standard and side-by-side options. During PowerPoint, use View Options menu at the top of the screen to adjust the zoom ratio and other features. Additionally, during the PowerPoint, you can use the slider between the shared screen and participants to slide the screen to your preference. To turn on Zoom's manual captioning, you will do that by selecting the CC icon on the menu bar. By changing the size of the captions by selecting the up arrow next to the CC and choose the settings. Move the captions by hovering over the captions and dragging them to preferred locations. Turn off the captions by selecting the CC icon to hide the captions. Additionally, the Stream Text Live link will be included in the chat for your use, and staff can provide it when asked. Additionally, as mentioned previously, we will be having Spanish interpretation for today's webinar. To access Zoom's language features, please select the globe icon on the menu bar, which is located on the bottom right of your screen. Click the language you would like to hear. Please note for this event, Spanish interpretation will be the only language alternative option during the event. To hear the interpreted language only, click Mute Original Audio. For the question and answer section of the event, please utilize Zoom's Q&A function. To ask a question, select Q&A at the bottom of your screen. There are two images on the screen. First is a gray toolbar where the Q&A feature is circled in red. A box to the left will pop up to input your questions throughout the webinar. Again, the second image on the screen is to the left is a white dialog box that shows once you select Q&A at the bottom of the screen. During the Q&A session, it will be presented at the end of our discussion and our presentations, and only selected questions will be answered, and ASL will be spotlighted throughout the event. With that, housekeeping is closed, and I pass it back to you, Executive Director Dawson-Rawlings.
Thank you, Abigail. And now we are going to move on to an overview of today's agenda, and Jan and I will take turns reading the agenda as well as the learning objectives. And so we've done our introductions. And by the way, just thank you, Abby, for reminding me to model accessibility. I have short, kind of salt and pepper blonde hair, and I use a wheelchair, which you can't really see. I'm a white woman who is wearing a suit with black and white polka dots and a black blazer. And we've done our introductions. And then after introductions, what are we going to do, Jan?
Yeah, and let me, so I'm, again, Deputy Director of ADA Programs for Pacific ADA Center. I am a white woman with mostly salt hair, a little bit of pepper, and I'm wearing glasses, and I do use a wheelchair, again, that you cannot see in the screen. I do have a disability, and I'm wearing a dark blue dress with a flowered print on it.
And Jan will be leading our training segment, and then after the training segment, we will have a detailed resource roundup for all of you. And we can go through the learning objectives now. Oh, sorry. Nope. Questions and answers and then closing remarks. And Jan, I'll let you read the learning objectives.
Thank you, April. So today we will learn how to implement strategies for maintaining operational resilience while ensuring accessibility for employees, customers, and stakeholders with diverse needs for businesses. We'll identify and utilize key local and national resources that support inclusive emergency preparedness and recovery for businesses. We'll understand the critical role of inclusive practices in emergency response planning and how that directly impacts employees, customers, and community engagement. And fourth and finally, we will evaluate the intersection of business continuity planning, which we'll describe later, and inclusion, and apply inclusive practices to strengthen overall business resilience.
Thank you, Jan. Now that we know a little bit about what we're going to be talking about today and the learning objectives, I'll talk a little bit about what the California Commission on Disability Access offers. We are a 17-member commission that was created in 2009 by the state legislature, and our goal is, I like to call it a brave space. What we do is we are a convener and a connector on the topic of disability access to businesses. We offer small business education and outreach, technical materials and trainings, listening forms and webinars, such as the webinar you're on with right now. And we also track disability access litigation for the state legislature. So we have a legal portal, and by law, attorneys and law firms have to submit within 5 business days copies of complaints related to website access and construction-related disability alleged claims related to business access. And our annual report to the legislature is utilized by trade organizations as well as small businesses and is a training tool to see kind of what the trends are in disability access litigation and to help reduce that litigation. And a little later in the presentation, we can talk more about how you can engage with us through our newsletter as well as contact us directly for programming assistance and for referrals to resources. Jan?
Thank you. So the Pacific ADA Center offers technical assistance through our phone line and also through email. We have real people that answer the phone and answer the emails. So we encourage you to call us and contact us by email. We will have our contact information at the end, just like April said they will have for CCDA as well. We also offer trainings. We typically offer trainings online these days, including our Lunch and Learn webinars, the ones that we do in collaboration with CCDA, like this one, and then on our own, our quarterly webinars. We also offer in-person trainings at times. We offer materials, which we usually offer through a link, through an email, or we can send people a document, a PDF document, accessible PDF, of course, for materials. And we also have a conference every year. This year, we will be offering our conference in March, in 10th and 11th of March, and we encourage people to register for our conference when we put out the registration information on our website. And again, later on, we'll be offering information about how to access our website and also how to subscribe to our emails and listserv and newsletter.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jan. And so let's get to the heart of it. Why does business resilience matter? So most of us have seen on the news, or maybe we've lived through it ourselves, particularly our friends from the LA area most recently, about the increased frequency of emergencies in California and how businesses have to adapt quickly to those emergencies. There's emergencies such as wildfires and power outages and extreme heat that are impacting business operations throughout California. And many businesses are really great at adapting quickly to these occurrences by shifting their services. You might be modifying your operations or even transforming yourselves into community support centers. We saw that a lot in LA, where the business community really, stood out for their neighbors and, You saw yogurt shops becoming a canned food drive center, or you saw, parking lots of businesses becoming a place to get baby food or diapers, for example. And while these pivots are often essential for continuity and community support, sometimes you might unintentionally create barriers for individuals with disabilities if access is not a core part of your planning process. So that is what this webinar is all about. And so before I turn it to Jan for our training moment, I just want all of you to think through this critical question. What happens to accessibility when a business shifts operations during emergencies? So keep that in your mind. We will have a Q&A after the resource roundup. And so now I will turn it to Jan for the bulk of our presentation, which is our training moment. And then I'll come back to talk more about resources and you can answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. So our training segment will look at integrating access into business resiliency and adaptation plans. So making sure that your business is resilient and can adapt to any disasters and emergencies that happen, and how you can make sure that you're still providing access and inclusion of people with disabilities, your customers, your employees during that time. Next slide, please. So let's start with a little bit of an overview on the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA. What a lot of people don't realize is that the ADA is actually a civil rights law. So any violation of the ADA is a violation of the civil rights of someone who falls under the definition of disability and is protected by the ADA. That includes employees and customers. So the origins of the ADA are in the civil rights movement and the disability rights movement. And I would say partially, at least, within the independent living movement that a lot of people with disabilities have been involved in since the 1970s at least. And so the ADA actually was signed into law in 1990, but had its origins well before that. And in 2009, the ADA Amendments Act clarified that the definition of disability should be broad in its coverage. So it covers a lot of people with a lot of different physical or mental impairments. And Congress intended for the ADA to be very broad and cover a number of people. So as I mentioned, the ADA was signed into law on July 26, 1990. It does have 5 titles. Title I covers employment for applicants and employees. Title II covers state and local governments. So that would be cities, counties, joint powers authorities, all the departments of those state and local governments as well. Title III, which we will mostly be focused on today, covers public accommodations, and that is small business or any size business really, and nonprofit organizations that are open to the public. And so that covers Title III. Title IV covers telecommunications, mostly covering the relay service and how people with hearing and/or speech disabilities might be able to engage in telecommunications with others. And then Title V, miscellaneous, as its name implies, covers lots of different areas, but it does include enforcement of the ADA and the fact that you cannot retaliate against someone for asserting their civil rights under the ADA. It's also important to note that both public and private transportation is covered under the ADA as well. So, as I mentioned, businesses open to the public. Businesses and nonprofits of any size open to the public are considered public accommodations and must comply with ADA Title III under federal law. And that's both building owners and businesses who operate in the buildings that are covered. So you might be renting a space from someone else who owns the building that you are in, but both the owner of the building and you as the business tenant that are open to the public are covered by ADA Title III as public accommodations. And then in California, there are many laws that cover businesses open to the public, but that includes, for purposes of accessibility, California Building Code Chapter 11B. So under the ADA Title III, You must provide an equal opportunity for people with disabilities who seek to access goods and services of that business or that nonprofit. You must remove physical barriers to accessibility when that's readily achievable to do. If you have a building that existed, prior to the ADA, of course, when you have newly constructed facilities, those have to comply completely with the ADA standards and with state building code as well. You also need to provide effective written and verbal communication to people who have disabilities that affect communication, and that can be people with vision, hearing, speech, and even sometimes reading disabilities or learning disabilities. And then you must make reasonable modifications of your policies, practices, and procedures when that is necessary to ensure that there is an equal opportunity under the ADA. And I would just like to remind people to please do post in the Q&A as opposed to in the chat for us because of the chat being distracting to people who may use screen readers. Thank you. Okay, next slide. So what are disasters and emergencies that businesses can face? And I'm sure all of you have a good idea of what these are, but we'll just mention some of them. Next slide. So this slide does talk about COVID-19. Of course, we're still dealing with COVID at times, particularly for people who may not be able to be fully vaccinated, but even those that are. But you could also have another pandemic that could take place and cause a disaster or emergency that businesses and nonprofits might have to deal with. Of course, being in California, we have earthquakes throughout the state that range from smaller earthquakes to larger ones. We have fires, like April mentioned earlier. We had terrible urban wildfires the beginning of the year in Los Angeles, but we have fires all the time that take place throughout the state and can affect businesses and nonprofits. We can have heavy snow, particularly in the mountainous areas, and that can impede business as well, snow and ice. We can have floods, and we can have power outages, which do take place from time to time. And some power outages can really affect people with disabilities very severely because they cannot be able to find power for their needs. So why does preparedness matter? The cost of not being prepared can be loss of revenue for the business, for customers, and can result in a loss of your reputation as a community business or a nonprofit. Also, there's really an important role that you play to serve all customers during emergencies. And accessibility can be overlooked if you're not planning for it. And we know that sometimes businesses and nonprofits even do other kinds of services or provide other kinds of goods during a disaster or emergency than they would normally provide, just because they are providing something that would be useful to the population that is recovering from a disaster. So strong businesses that really want to be there for their customers, their employees, strong nonprofits as well for the people that they're serving, will make plans and continue operations during and after disasters and emergencies. So you plan, then the disaster or emergency occurs. Hopefully it's not a terrible one, but you sort of never know what you might be facing. And then you enter the recovery phase, and you need to be sure that you're planning for all of the phases and that you're planning for accessibility throughout that phase and the continuity of your operations. So what is a business continuity plan or planning? That is a plan to maintain or restart essential operations once the disaster is over and you are in the recovery phase, or if you can maintain your services or goods during the disaster, then that's, of course, the best situation. It also would support flexibility because you often don't really know what things are going to be like during the disaster or even during the recovery phase for your business or nonprofit. And you need to be able to have a business continuity plan that will be flexible so that you can, move through all the possibilities that you may face during the disaster. And then the value of that business continuity plan to your customers and others, or to the people that you serve, is that you can meet your obligations, you can protect your employees, and you can serve your customers or people that take advantage of your services if you're a nonprofit. So what should businesses consider when they're making a business continuity plan? First, you have to identify what services and goods you have and those that must continue. So know what to do during the disaster or emergency, so that you can maintain your businesses or your services or your nonprofit services. Know how to continue operations as soon as possible once the disaster or the immediate danger has passed, and know how to deliver your goods and services during the recovery period. What's going to happen during that recovery period? Because it's going to be a difficult time for everyone, including your business, including your customers, including your employees. So as you're considering all of this in your business continuity plan, you need to understand, how will you provide all of those goods and services in an accessible manner? How will you make sure people with disabilities that are customers, employees, or maintain your services, how will you make sure that they get accessible goods and services? And you need to have your accessibility as a core part of your business continuity plan. BCP is business continuity plan. And you need to really build a resilience mindset. Again, being flexible and responsible in adapting, but making sure that you're going to be resilient during the disaster and during the recovery phase after the disaster as well. So what issues should those business continuity plans address? Keeping staff and customers safe during a disaster or emergency, that's really a huge priority, to make sure that people are safe during the disaster. You should have evacuation plans when you need those for whatever disaster or emergency you're facing. You should have a communications plan for how will you communicate with your customers, with your employees during the disaster, or even with the people who may take advantage of your services as a nonprofit. How will you communicate with those clients or consumers? How will you continue your operations during that whole time of the disaster and then afterward during the recovery? How will you provide information and assistance you may need from the city and or county in which you're located? How will you gain that information and assistance? Because there may be quite a bit of that assistance that is available, but you need to know where to find it, how to access it, who will have it, and how to secure funding for rebuilding if that's necessary after the disaster or emergency. So whatever funding you may need before the disaster, you need to have that in your business continuity plan to know how to access that funding should that become necessary. So when a business has to pivot or change roles and adapt during an emergency, so this can happen sometimes to businesses. For example, a restaurant may become a donation center because people are not really going out to eat or going to the restaurant and accessing its services as a restaurant, but it can be a very valuable place to come as a donation center. Or a retail shop could become a cooling center in very hot weather, where you can allow people to come in and access your retail shop that otherwise they wouldn't be shopping because it is so hot outside. And also a facilities warehouse can become a shelter hub that you can open your facility warehouse to become a shelter. Then you could have new access barriers that can arise that you're not used to having during your normal operations as a nonprofit or as a business. So you need to consider what those new access barriers might be and how you're going to overcome those and remove those barriers and make sure that people with all types of disabilities can access the services that they need, even when you're adapting to provide a different role and a different service. And you need to make sure that your ADA obligations are met during the emergency, and that your access, you have to scale and measure that with how you're adapting your business. ADA obligations do not stop or pause during a disaster. A lot of people believe that they do, but they don't. And so you have to make sure that you're still maintaining all your ADA obligations, like for your physical access, your facility access, your communication access, the access to your goods and services. So as well, potential new access barriers can arise that maybe hadn't arisen before when you were doing your regular business. Those can be common issues. Again, ADA obligations remain during the emergencies. So for example, if you're a cooling center, you may need to make sure that there's enough room for people to be able to access your shop for when you're serving a cooling center, or that you're able to access water for people, during that time. If you're going to distribute supplies during a disaster, instead of having your restaurant open, you need to make sure that people with disabilities can move around, that there's an accessible route throughout the area and can access the disaster supplies that they need. So all of those obligations must remain during the emergency, and even if you're adapting your services during that emergency. So you also want to make sure that you're doing inclusive emergency planning. You may have a temporary layout that preserves clear and wide paths that maintain accessibility. You also need accessible signage and alternative formats for your new services or your entrances that maybe you didn't have before. Maybe you have a different entrance and you may need a sign for that. You must maintain your bathroom. If you're allowing people to use your restroom, you must maintain those as being ADA compliant and not store a lot of supplies there so that they are no longer usable and by your customers or even by your employees. You must train your staff in supporting customers with disabilities, making sure that they can assist people in the ways that they need assistance. They may need assistance with reaching something. They may need assistance with getting their money. They may need assistance with having you move items so that they can get through. They may need assistance with reading something to them. They may need you to write notes back and forth if they are deaf or hard of hearing. So you need to train your staff in all the ways that they might support those customers or those consumers or clients with disabilities. And as we have said, you need to integrate accessibility and inclusion into your emergency preparedness checklist and your business continuity plan to make sure that you're keeping that plan going. So you need to make sure that it's into your business continuity plan by adding accessibility checks into every emergency scenario. So different emergencies will be more likely than not, depending on where you are. If you're up in the mountains, having a really heavy snowfall could be more likely, or having a fire or an earthquake could happen there. And so you just need to figure out what's the most likely scenario and what you need to prepare for that emergency, and make sure that you're adding accessibility for all of that, and that your staff are aware of that accessibility, and that you're involving people with disabilities in your planning, making sure that people with disabilities are understanding what is required and what they might require, because they can give you a lot of information about what is required for them. And so if you have people with a number of different disabilities, yes, you can get a lot of information on what they might require and how you can maintain accessibility for different disabilities. And yes, I did see a post in the chat about that there are temporary interruptions that are allowed for maintenance of accessible features. It just depends on why that temporary interruption might be necessary. But if you can try to plan for as much accessibility as possible without an interruption, that is the best possible thing. But yes, you are allowed to have temporary interruptions into your accessibility, but you need to remove those barriers, whatever barriers they are, as soon as you can. And just make accessibility a standard part of your readiness and not a footnote or an addendum. So I will now turn the floor back over to April Dawson-Rawlings to talk about the resource roundup, because CCDA has many different resources that can be useful to you as businesses in your business continuity plan and in planning for disasters.
Thank you so much, Jan. I really appreciated your presentation. I certainly learned a lot, and we really appreciate being able to do these webinar series with the Pacific ADA Center. This is April. I'm back, and I wanted all of you to know that CCDA staff has prepared a resource roundup document that will be placed in the chat shortly if it isn't already there, and attendees will be able to access it. And first, I'm going to talk a little bit about the federal level resources that we have in the resource roundup guide for you. So this covers a lot of the information that businesses can reach out to, because we know that this is only an hour presentation. So, but it's quite detailed. So you'll be able to get a lot of your questions answered. So for the federal level, we have resources from the Small Business Administration as well as FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. The Internal Revenue Service has some disaster assistance and emergency relief for individuals and businesses. So that's the federal level. Next slide, please. And I just want to remind everyone, I love what's happening right now in the chat, that we have some people here that are really knowledgeable about the ADA. I just want to be mindful of those who use screen readers. If we could kind of transition some of our comments to the Q&A so as to maintain accessibility. We are seeing what's in the chat, and we are going to reference as much as we can. So for the state level, we have some resources to share with you about Cal OES. So Cal OES, as well as GoBiz, California Business Resiliency Program, and also the SBDCs, or California Small Business Development Centers, also have some information for you. So check that out when you look at the resource roundup. And some of these links also have access to funding sources or tax incentives for keeping your business accessible. Next slide, please. Local resources, it's really great to reach out to your local chambers of commerce. Many of you are probably already connected with them, but they can help be a resource to you, as well as emergency management agencies in your area. I also highly encourage people to reach out to their local Center for Independent Living. Also, the California Foundation for Independent Living Centers has contracts with Southern California Edison and PG&E to provide disaster assistance during power outages. So if you're a person with a disability and you need oxygen or things like that, this isn't specific to businesses, but it's important for you all to know that, you can have access to a battery through that program, or you can have access to, things like gas money or food money or hotels if you can no longer access your home because you need to move somewhere that has power during those power safety shutoffs. And that's important for businesses to know, to spread that information to your customers. And I also highly encourage businesses to, get to know your customers with disabilities, and also to make sure that you can create, partnerships with your Centers for Independent Living. Maybe you can invite some of your customers to come and talk to your staff about what they need in a disaster, and how to maybe you could also ask them, when you're making a plan change or you're practicing for a disaster, to invite customers with disabilities and give them a gift card or something something for free from your business as an incentive to participate in those exercises, for example. Also, the Pacific ADA Center, who we have a great partnership with, is here today, and later Jan will say a little bit more about how to get a hold of their organization. Also, in the resource roundup guide, you can talk about FEMA guides and information, as well as I mentioned before, CFILC and the ADA National Network. There's a lot of emergency preparedness resources. Slide, please. And now we are going to move on to the question and answer session of today's event, and I'm going to ask Abigail to assist me. We have some predetermined questions and we'll also answer as time allows, and I think we'll have time, the questions that are in the chat, questions or comments that are in the chat.
Thank you, Executive Director Dawson Rawlings. All right, to get us started with our question and answer session, we're going to go through these predetermined questions, and then we'll also look at the questions in the Q&A chat. So for our first question that we have, what is the first step I can take to include access in my business's disaster plan? What is the first step so basically, what is the first step to include access in the business's BCP?
Okay. Do you, April, do you want me to answer that, or would you like to
Go
answer
ahead.
that?
I was just about to say, go ahead, Jan.
Okay. Okay, great. So I think the first step is just really understanding with your employees how your business operates or your nonprofit operates, and what you might need to do in order to be able to have your business continue or your services continue, during a disaster. So you need to consider all the different types of disasters and consider, what are all the things you would need to do to make sure that your services and goods continue, and how to make those services and goods accessible and keep them accessible as much as possible to everyone. And I would say, secondly, just like April was saying earlier, get in touch with your local Center for Independent Living or California Foundation for Independent Living Centers and invite the disability community to tell you more about what are the things that they need, so that you can be sure that you're including accessibility and the full amount of accessibility in your business continuity plan, and take advantage of all the resources that April mentioned that CCDA has as well. Review those and see what you might need to be able to include. So this is kind of how you outline and determine what's going to go in your business continuity plan, and then begin to write it.
Great information. Next question, please.
Our next question is, does the ADA still apply if I change how I operate during an emergency?
Yeah, the short answer is yes, it does. And Jan, I'll let you go into a little bit more detail. Some of this was covered in the presentation, but maybe you can do some reminder highlights.
Sure. Yes, absolutely. The ADA does still apply, even if you change how you're operating, during a disaster. So you want to make sure that people know still how do you get into your entrance? Is that accessible? Is there a accessible route throughout the area, even if you have changed how you're operating? Is there, something that you would need to look at for communication with the people who might come in? How would you change that? How would you need to change it for communicating with your customers, your consumers, or your clients? Is your restroom available? And what would you need to do to make sure that it's available to customers and that it is still accessible? So, and really keeping in mind in general that disasters and emergencies are a stressful time for everyone, and they can particularly be stressful for people with disabilities who are facing the lack of accessibility and the lack of things being open to them and the lack of communication. So keep that in mind, that you're being inclusive and welcoming to people with disabilities as much as you can, even if you change the types of operations that you have, because you're still open to the public and you're still covered by the ADA.
Great to know. It's very important to know that things change, but that resources are out there and that the ADA, still applies during a disaster, and that there are ways to achieve that without it feeling like a large hoop to jump through, and that it's good for business. What's our next question? These are great questions.
This segues perfectly to the next question. What are the most common acceptability gaps in emergency plans?
I can start this one out because I can say that as a person who experiences a physical disability, and there are many other disabilities just besides the ones that disclose for us, which I have, and also as somebody who works with organizations that have to have BCPs, that a lot of times I'll see disability access as an afterthought, or it's created by people who don't have disabilities. And so that's kind of what I was talking about earlier, about how it's really important as you're developing your business continuity plan to think about how a customer with different types of disabilities, whether it's physical or sensory or hearing or blind or others, how they would continue to access your facility, and try to think of the what ifs. I also think it's really important to think about including people with disabilities who are your customers in those conversations. Like, hey, we're working on our BCP, here at the Chamber of Commerce in Pacific 88 City, for example. Fake City, USA, and we would really like to invite customers with disabilities to this focus group so that we think about those things. Or after you've created some drills or created some mock opportunities to practice your BCP, invite customers with disabilities into your space to say, okay, would this still work for you if we move this over here, or if we had to block this, how would you access the soda machine or whatever, or if we turn this into a relief center, who do we need to talk to make this happen? And just make sure that you're centering the voices of your customers at every step. Jan, did you have anything to add to that?
Just make sure that you're understanding that there are people with disabilities that are not visible, that you may not see, like people who have autism, people who have ADHD, people who have mental health disabilities. There are a number of people that have disabilities that are not seen, and don't assume that because you can't see it that they don't have a disability. So if they say, this is what would really help me with my disability, don't just dismiss them and say, well, you're not really covered under the ADA because I don't really see your disability. Make sure that you're accounting for all of the different ways that your customers may be telling you that it could be helpful to them during a disaster or emergency, and at least with regard to what you're able to do as a business or how you've changed your operations, that you could take advantage and understand and learn from that. And keep in mind that the more inclusive and open that you are, the more people we're going to continue to frequent your business and continue to come there and to tell others about it and to have a positive opinion about it. So ultimately, it's really good for business for you to be able to serve all your customers.
Absolutely. Any other questions, Abby, before we get to the chat ones?
Our last predetermined question we have, it just builds upon exactly what y'all were addressing, is how can we foster a culture of preparedness that includes the needs of all employees and customers? I
think just going this April, to start us off, just making sure that disability access is always at the front end of how you do business, that disability access is good for business, thinking about the what ifs. I love what Jan said about how not all disabilities are visible. And I think, just making sure that if you're a manager of a company or a small business, that you're talking to employees about preparedness all the time, that it just becomes a normalized part of how you're doing business. Like, on the third Wednesday of every month, we're going to do a fire drill, and we're going to make sure that we're including the accessible exits in that fire drill, for example, or we're going to talk about how we're going to help someone who has autism to, go to a quiet place in our business if there's a fire drill or something like that, and to just make sure that it's something that's normalized, regularly talked about, that you're modeling it from the top down, and that you're also empowering your employees to also feel like they don't always have to say, oh, let me speak to the manager, but that there are times when they feel empowered in the moment because they've been trained to know what they have to do if they encounter a person with a disability with an access need, in a disaster or not. Did you have anything else to add to that, Jan?
Yeah, and just make sure that you're understanding which of your employees may have disabilities and may need things as reasonable accommodations, during a disaster or emergency. And so, making sure that you're asking that in addition to making sure they're trained on how to assist customers and make customers feel welcome and included.
Wonderful. It's all about putting access at the front end and inclusion and normalizing the conversation. And now we're going to move to some live questions, and Abigail and staff are going to help us see who has engaged with us live here.
For our first live Q&A question, we have, does the ADA apply to remodels the same as new locations?
I'll let Jan take that one.
Yes, the ADA applies to what it calls alterations, which would be, it depends on how extensive the remodel is, however, as to whether or not the alterations requirements would apply. So you can certainly contact us about that. But the more extensive you get into in moving, fixtures and walls and doorways and other kinds of things, the more likely it is that, yes, that remodel would be covered. And even changing your flooring, changing your carpeting can actually be a remodel that affects accessibility, because if you put in a really thick carpet or thick carpet pad, that may reduce the ability of people, particularly that use manual wheelchairs or some other mobility devices, to be able to get across your store or your nonprofit. So make sure that you contact somebody to see the extent of your remodel and whether or not it would be covered. But indeed, it often is covered, yes, in addition to new construction.
Great. Any other questions?
Our next question is, does this training provide foundation credits towards ADA coordinator certification?
That's a great question. This is April. And so we've consulted with several organizations about how to ensure that our webinars meet those standards. It is up to the credit granting authority to decide if they do, but I will let you know that we have an agenda, as well as we have a question and answer. We will have a survey, as well as learning objectives. And so that commonly are the prongs that are required for many foundation credits. And I'll let Jan speak to that if she wants to add anything. But if you need a certificate of completion for this training, you can email us at ccda@dgs.ca.gov, and we can provide that for you to give to the credit granting authority. We don't want to speak for the credit granting authority, but we have worked hard to make sure that our webinars are quality and will meet many of those standards.
Yes, and I would say yes. If you're specifically asking about the ADA Coordinator Training Certification Program, you should contact them, but it is likely that they would give credit for this, probably under the emergency preparedness or maybe under ADA Title III. So you'll need to contact them to see about whether they will accept this and under what category it would fall.
Thank you. Abby, are there any other questions in the chat that we should thinking about?
Yeah, for time constraints, if you'd like to move on for the closing, we can to move forward.
Absolutely, we can do that. I did see something in the chat that talked about if Pacific ADA or CCDA has mutual aid. I'll just take 30 seconds to say, making sure that you all understand that because CCDA is nested within state service, and so we're nested within the executive branch. Whenever there is an emergency, the agencies that are under the executive branch, such as CCDA, will receive their assignments in coordination from the governor's office. So, for example, in the last disaster that happened in Los Angeles, for the fires, many of the programs within the Department of General Services were given tasks by the governor to be, so all state employees are sort of like can be called on to be disaster workers. And so I could be called on to be a disaster worker. And so many of us were given tasks. CCDA was not given a specific task in those last groups of disasters, but I did use the opportunity to educate my chain of command about how CCDA could provide a unique perspective and assistance as volunteers during those disasters. And typically what would happen is Cal OES would work with the governor's office to decide what was needed, and then Cal OES would give the state service employees and CCDA specifically our task. So that's how that would work. I don't know if Jan wants to say something 30 seconds about that. I just didn't want that to go away. And then we will wrap up.
Yes, thank you. This is Jan speaking. Yeah, the Pacific ADA Center is not really in a position to provide mutual aid, but we can definitely be there as an information resource. So please utilize us for our technical assistance, utilize our website if that's helpful. So we definitely can be an information resource and to refer you to other places perhaps to be able to gain information, but we are not in the position to provide actual mutual aid or to be disaster service workers.
Thanks, Jan. And now we will be getting ready to close. And so, Jan, I'd like to ask you if you can tell us how to stay connected to the Pacific ADA Center.
Yes, well, I mentioned at the top of the presentation that we do provide technical assistance by email and by phone. So you can call 1-800-949-4232. 1-800-949-4232 to get technical assistance specialists who can answer your questions Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. And if they are on another call, you can leave a message and they will be happy to call you back promptly. Also, the email address where you can ask questions is info@adapacific.org. And our website is at https://adapacific.org. And you can subscribe to our newsletter also by going to our website, adapacific.org/subscribe. And we encourage you to do that, to know what's going on, what webinars we may be having, and we do talk about what's happening nationwide with regard to the ADA. So we encourage you to sign up for our subscription and our listserv.
And this is April. I encourage all of you to stay connected to the California Commission on Disability Access. You can go to our website, which is https://www.dgs.ca.gov/CCDA. And we have regular meetings that are all open. All of our subcommittee and regular full commission meetings are open to the public. We meet 3 times a year as a commission, and then we have several ways to get involved as a public stakeholder. There's public comment period in all of our meetings. We also, as you can see, staff do quite a bit of work in between those meetings. You can go to our website and click on our resources tab for information about our accessible parking toolkits and our annual reports and all of the information that we provide for business access. And you can also email us, and we regularly take public inquiries. If you have a question about disability access, our job is to be a connector to people like the Pacific ADA Center who can answer those questions. And so our email is ccda@dgs.ca.gov. You could also write to us at 400 R Street, Suite 310, Sacramento 95811, or call us at 916-319-9974. And as I mentioned, there is a resource guide that our staff have created for today's presentation that I went over a little bit at a high level earlier that you'll receive a copy of. And we'll make sure that that's put on our resource tab as well. And we're also looking for ideas for resources as well. So I highly encourage you to engage with us, sign up for our newsletter, go to our Facebook and YouTube channels. And now I will talk about our evaluation. There is a page I'm looking at here that has a QR code as well as a hyperlink for the evaluation. I highly encourage you to fill that out. Many of you will need to do that if you're going to your authorities for credits. And it also helps us improve how we can make our webinars better. And Abigail just put it in the chat as well, the link in the chat. So thank you all for being here today. We really appreciate all of your engagement. Also, I took note of some of you who are active in the chat. I will reach out to you individually to engage with you, and thank you for your efforts as well. And I want to thank Jan for being a great partner, and the Civic ADA Center for being a great, strategic partner with us through these webinar series. So I hope everyone has a wonderful day, and think about one thing you're going to do when you get back to your office about disaster preparedness and inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting us. Thank you and to everyone for coming.